We barely even walked through the door at Jason's party before I knew something was off. It was in the way Emily moved that night, like she owned the room, strutting around like a queen, but in a way that felt wrong. I've seen her confident before, but this was different. Her eyes darted around like she was hunting for something or someone. She barely acknowledged me. Just a quick, "Oh hey, you made it," before disappearing into the crowd. I thought maybe it was just the vibe of the party, or maybe she had a little too much to drink already. So I grabbed a beer and tried to relax. I didn't expect her to hang on me all night, but the way she was avoiding me was loud. That's the best way to describe it. A lot of noise for saying nothing. But it wasn't until about an hour later that things took a turn I never saw coming. I'm standing by the kitchen, catching up with a couple of friends when I notice Emily way across the room laughing like she just heard the funniest joke in the world. She was draped over someone almost hanging off his shoulder. At first, I couldn't see who it was. But then the crowd shifted and I realized it was Nick. Yeah, my twin brother. Now Nick and I look alike, obviously, but our differences are crystal clear if you know us. He's always been the reckless one, the one who never really grew up. While I built a career, a house, a marriage, Nick was out there screwing around like life's one big joke. But tonight he was the one laughing and Emily was right there with him. I try to play it cool thinking maybe I was just being stupid. Maybe they were just having a friendly moment. But then she kissed him. Right there in the middle of the party, my wife put her hands on his face and kissed him. And Nick, that bastard, didn't push her away. He leaned into it. First, I froze. It felt like someone had just punched me in the gut, and for a split second, I thought, what the FCK is going on? Maybe Emily thought it was me. After all, we're twins. But the longer I stood there, the more my mind raced through every little thing that had been off lately. The secret of texts, the late nights, the coldness. Was this it? Had this been going on under my nose the entire time? I didn't know what to do next. Should I storm over and drag Nick out by his throat? Should I grab Emily and demand answers right there in front of everyone? My brain was screaming, but my body couldn't move. Then something even crazier happened. Emily pulled away, and instead of looking embarrassed or guilty, she laughed. Not a no-ops. I made a mistake laugh, but a smug, I know what I'm doing laugh. And Nick, he was grinning like a wolf. It wasn't a mistake. I don't know what kind of sick game they were playing, but at that moment, I was the punchline. Standing there like an idiot while my wife kissed my brother like it was no big deal. And that's when I snapped. Without thinking, I dropped my beer on the floor and made my way across the room. My heart was pounding, my vision narrowing until all I could see was them. Nick caught sight of me first, and for a split second his smirk faltered. But then it came back, even more arrogant, like he was daring me to do something. Emily didn't even notice me until I was standing right in front of them. What the hell is going on? I spat, my voice louder than I intended. Conversations around us died instantly. Emily's head whipped around, her smile slowly fading when she saw the look on my face. But the crazy part, she didn't look scared or sorry. No, she just rolled her eyes like I was the one overreacting. What's your problem? She asked, her voice dripping with annoyance. It's just a kiss. Just kiss. Before I could even process that, Nick, that slimy FCK, chimed in with a grin. Come on, man, relax. It's not like she meant it. That was it. Something inside me shattered. My wife and my brother standing there like nothing was wrong. Like I was the crazy one for caring. The betrayal hit me so hard I couldn't breathe, couldn't think straight. I didn't know who to hate more at that moment. Emily for doing this to me, or Nick for not stopping her. And the worst part, I wasn't even sure this was the first time. The silence after Nick's words hit me harder than any punch ever could. It was like the room shrank. All the air sucked out, leaving me there, drowning in the betrayal. I looked back at Emily waiting, begging for some sign of regret, an apology, anything. But no, she just crossed her arms, raised an eyebrow, and stared back at me like I was the one causing a scene. You're F-king unbelievable. I finally managed to choke out, my voice barely containing the fury bubbling beneath. My fists were clenched, every muscle in my body screaming to knock Nick out right there, but something kept me still. Maybe it was the disbelief that this was real. Maybe it was the sick hope that I'd wake up any second from this nightmare. Unbelievable. Emily shot back, her tone sharp like I had no right to be upset. Are you seriously this bent out of shape over one kiss? Jesus, Jake, get over yourself. Get over myself? I repeated, my voice rising. I just saw my wife kissing my brother, and you want to get over it? Nick took a step forward, and I instinctively took a step toward him, ready for whatever was about to happen next. But instead of throwing a punch, I was met with that infuriating smirk again. Look, man, he started all calm and smooth. It's not what you think. She thought I was you. That's it. Simple mistake. Emily nodded. Her arms still crossed, but her eyes flickered just for a second with something else. Something that wasn't remorse, but more like irritation. Like she couldn't believe we were having this conversation at all. Yeah, she added, rolling her eyes again. I thought it was you, Jake. Twins, remember? It's not that deep. The rage that had been simmering inside me boiled over. My hands were shaking as I pointed between the two of them. That's your excuse? That you thought Nick was me? I was practically shouting now, and people were starting to stare, their conversations long forgotten. Good. Let them see. Let them watch this train wreck unfold. Nick shrugged like he was bored, but Emily, she didn't even flinch. She just stood there looking at me like I was the world's biggest idiot for daring to be mad. That's not the point, Jake. She said, her voice cold now, like she was done with me, done with all of it. The point is, nothing happened. I kissed him. Big deal. It didn't mean anything. Didn't mean anything? My head was spinning. The woman I married, the woman I built my life around, was standing there telling me she kissed my brother and it didn't mean anything. And the way she said it so casual, like she was discussing the weather, made me realize something. This wasn't the first time she crossed a line. I could see it in her face, in the way she wasn't even trying to make this right. She wasn't sorry. Hell, she didn't even care. What's really going on here, Emily? I asked, my voice dropping, trying to steady the tidal wave of anger threatening to drown me. Because I don't believe for a second that you didn't know what you were doing. So tell me the truth. What's been happening behind my back? She hesitated. For the first time, she actually looked uneasy. She glanced at Nick, then back at me, and I could see the gears turning in her head. But instead of answering, she just sighed and said, "You're being dramatic, Jake. You always overthink everything. Overthink. Overthink." I took a step closer to her, lowering my voice, so only she could hear. "I'm asking you one last time. Tell me what the hell is going on, or I swear to God. This ends right here, right now." Emily's eyes flashed, and I could see that familiar stubbornness set in. But then she did something that knocked the wind out of me. She smiled. G.F. King smiled. "Fine," she said, her voice so casual it made my skin crawl. "You want the truth? Here it is. I'm bored, Jake. I'm bored with you, with us, with everything. So yeah, maybe I kissed Nick. Maybe I wanted to feel something exciting for once. Maybe I've been feeling like this for a while, and you just didn't notice." It was like a bomb went off in my chest. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words were stuck in my throat, choked by the shock and pain of what she just said. Nick, who had been silent for too long, finally chimed in. "Come on, man. She's just being honest. Don't you want honesty? Honesty. That's what they were calling this. A kiss right in front of me. A confession that my wife was bored with our life. And I was supposed to be thankful for the honesty. My fists were trembling, and every nerve in my body screamed at me to break something. Anything. But instead I laughed. A bitter, hollow laugh that surprised even me. Honesty. I repeated. "You really want to talk about honesty? Then here's some for you. The two of you are the most F***ed up people I've ever met. And I don't care how you try to spin this. You just destroyed everything." Emily just shrugged like it didn't even register. "You'll get over it, Jake. You always do." And that's when I realized she didn't care. Not about me, not about us, not about the wreckage she was leaving behind. I looked at Nick, and for the first time I saw him clearly. He wasn't just my brother. He was the guy who would take what wasn't his without a second thought, without a shred of guilt. I was done with both of them. "I'm leaving," I said quietly, barely able to keep my voice from shaking. "And don't expect to see me again, either of you." And as I turned to walk away, Emily's voice cut through the air like a knife, dripping with sarcasm. "Good. Maybe you'll finally grow a pair." Walking out of that room felt like stepping into a different universe, one where nothing made sense anymore. The air outside hit me like a slap in the face, cold and sharp, but it didn't numb the storm ripping through my chest. My mind was on fire. Flashes of Emily's cold eyes, Nick's smug grin, that F***king kiss, all swirling together like a tornado inside me. I couldn't think straight. I needed to hit something, needed to scream, needed to do anything to release the pressure building inside, but I just kept walking. There was no plan, no destination. I barely knew where my legs were taking me. Just away from them. Away from that toxic party where my world had collapsed. My fists were still clenched, knuckles white, every muscle in my body ready to explode, but somehow I kept moving forward. I wasn't even halfway down the street when I heard footsteps behind me. Jake! Hey, wait. It was Nick's voice. Of course it was. I stopped dead in my tracks, and for a split second, I thought about just ignoring him, about walking away and never looking back. But then I heard his footsteps getting closer, his voice ringing out again, this time more urgent. Jake, we need to talk. We don't need to talk. Nick, we need to fight. That's all there is left to do. I turned around slowly, my eyes locking onto his as he jogged up to me. Breathless but still wearing that goddamn smirk like this was just some misunderstanding between us. Like we were still brothers. Listen, man, he started, hands raised like he was trying to calm me down. I get that you're pissed, all right? Get up. But can we just talk about this for a second? You're blowing this out of proportion. Out of proportion. I could feel my blood pounding in my ears. Every word he said, driving me closer to the edge. Blowing this out of proportion? I echoed, my voice cold and steady in a way that surprised even me. You let my wife kiss you. You didn't stop her. And now you're telling me I'm overreacting? Nick sighed, running a hand through his hair. Clearly frustrated that I wasn't just rolling over and accepting his bullshit *T. Look, man, I didn't know what was happening. All right? She came on to me, and I thought. You thought what? I snapped, stepping closer to him, my voice growing louder. You thought it'd be fun to see how far you could go before I noticed? Did you even consider for 1 second what that would do to me? Nick took a step back, his face finally losing that smirk as he realized I wasn't backing down this time. Come on, Jake. It's not like that, he muttered, his tone changing to something softer, more defensive. I didn't want to hurt you, all right? It was just, I don't know, man. It was just a stupid moment. Stupid. That word rang in my ears like a gunshot. A stupid moment. He was talking about my marriage, about my wife, about everything that had just imploded in front of me, and all he had to say was that it was stupid. Before I could even process what I was doing, my hand shot out and grabbed him by the collar, yanking him closer. My breath was hot, my voice a low growl as I spoke. You think this is stupid? You think screwing with my life is just some *king joke? For a split second, Nick's eyes widened, and I could see that he wasn't as confident as he wanted to be. He put his hands up trying to defuse the situation, but I wasn't backing off this time. I could feel the rage pulsing through my veins like a dam about to burst, and for the first time in my life, I wanted to hurt him. My brother, the guy I'd grown up with, the one person I thought I could trust. I wanted to break him. I'm sorry. All right, Nick said, his voice shaking slightly as he tried to pry my hand off his collar. Just let go, Jake. I said I'm sorry, but sorry wasn't enough. It would never be enough. And in that moment, I realized just how up our relationship had become. This wasn't just about Emily. This was about years of Nick pushing boundaries, always taking things too far, always getting away with it because I let him, because I was the good twin, the one who always forgave, always gave him another chance. But this was different. Sorry doesn't fix this. I spat, shoving him backward with a force that sent him stumbling. You crossed a line, Nick. You crossed a line, and there's no coming back from that. Nick caught his balance, his eyes narrowing as he looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something like fear flash across his face. Not fear of me, but fear of what he'd just lost. Me, his brother. The one person who had always been in his corner, no matter how badly he screwed up. He opened his mouth to say something, but I cut him off before he could even try. Don't bother. I growled, my voice low and dangerous. There's nothing you can say that'll make this right. Nick looked at me for a long moment, his expression shifting from fear to something else, something darker. You know what, Jake? He said finally, his voice dripping with bitterness. "You're always playing the victim. Maybe if you weren't such a boring, predictable prick, she wouldn't have come to me in the first place." It was like a switch flipped in my brain. All the restraint, all the years of holding back, of letting him get away with his SHD because he was my brother, it was gone. Without thinking, I lunged at him, my fist connecting with his jaw in one swift, brutal motion. He staggered backward, shock and pain flashing across his face as he fell to the ground. For a moment, there was nothing but the sound of my own ragged breathing and the echo of the punch still vibrating through my arm. I stood over him, fists clenched, chest heaving, waiting to see if he'd get up, if he'd say something that would push me even further. But he didn't. He just sat there, clutching his jaw, looking up at me with a mix of rage and disbelief. "Stay the FCK away from me," I said, my voice low and cold, my anger seeping out with every word. "And stay the FCK away from Emily." Nick didn't respond. He just glared at me, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. But he didn't get up. He knew better. Leaving Nick sprawled out on the sidewalk, I felt nothing. Not guilt, not satisfaction. Just a hollow, echoing numbness that settled deep in my bones. As I walked away, his words played over and over in my head, each one twisting the knife deeper. "Maybe if you weren't such a boring, predictable prick, she wouldn't have come to me." Was that it? Was I too safe? Too boring? Did she find excitement in breaking every promise we made? I needed answers, but not from Nick, from her. By the time I reached our house, the adrenaline had started to wear off, leaving me raw and shaking. My hands fumbled with the keys, my mind racing through what had happened, through what was about to happen. I could still feel the weight of Nick's jaw against my fist, but that hadn't brought any closure. It wasn't Nick I needed to face anymore. I swung the door open and was hit by the stillness of the house, the kind that made every little sound, my footsteps, the rustle of my jacket, seem unnaturally loud. Emily's car was in the driveway, but the house felt empty. Cold. Detached. Like it wasn't my home anymore. Just a place I was passing through. Maybe it never was. I found her in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with a glass of wine in hand. She didn't even flinch when she saw me. Just looked up, took a slow sip, and then with the same dismissive tone she'd used at the party, she asked, "So how'd it go with Nick?" That's what she starts with. Not an apology, not even a question about how I'm feeling. Just that. I could feel the anger rising again, but I didn't want to lose control. Not yet. Not before I got the truth. "Don't play games with me, Emily," I said, my voice barely holding steady. "I'm done with the lies. Tell me the truth, or I swear to God, I'm walking out that door, and we're done for good." She rolled her eyes like I was being overly dramatic, but I could see it. The flicker of something behind her calm facade. Annoyance? Fear? Guilt? It didn't matter. I was done guessing. "You want the truth?" she asked, setting her glass down and crossing her arms. "Fine. Here it is, Jake. I've been miserable for months. You don't notice anything. You don't pay attention. All you care about is work the same routine day in and day out. It's like I'm just some part of the furniture to you. And yeah, maybe I started looking for excitement somewhere else. Is that what you want to hear?" Her words hit me like a freight train. The calmness in her voice. The way she just dropped that confession without hesitation. Like it was some small, insignificant detail. I could barely breathe, my chest tight with the weight of everything she was saying. "You started looking for excitement?" I repeated, my voice trembling with rage. "With who? How long, Emily? How long has this been going on?" She sighed, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, her eyes narrowing like she was tired of the conversation already. "Does it matter? Look, I kissed Nick tonight, but it was just a spur-of-the-moment thing. But yeah, there's been someone else." The world seemed to tilt. My stomach twisted into a knot, and I had to grip the edge of the counter just to stay upright. Someone else. The words felt foreign in my mouth, like they belonged to some other reality. Not mine. Not our life. Who the hell is he? Her eyes flickered, and for a second, I thought I saw a flash of fear, but then she shrugged like this was no big deal. "He's nobody, Jake. Just someone I met at the gym. It's not like it was serious. But you didn't notice. You never notice anything anymore. Not serious." My fists clenched, nails digging into my palms as I tried to hold back the wave of fury crashing through me. You've been screwing around with some guy from the gym, and you think it's not serious? Jesus. Emily, are you even hearing yourself? Don't turn this around on me. She snapped, her voice suddenly sharp. You push me to this. You and your boring, predictable life. I was suffocating here, Jake, and you didn't even see it. I didn't see it because you didn't have King tell me. I shouted, slamming my fist on the counter, making her jump. You didn't give me a chance to fix anything. You just went behind my back like a coward. Emily's face twisted into a sneer, the calm mask she'd been wearing cracking under the pressure. You think you could have fixed this? You can't fix what's broken, Jake. You were never going to be enough for me, and deep down you know that. Her words cut deeper than I thought possible. Every inch of me wanted to scream, to throw something, to make her feel even a fraction of the pain she was causing, but I didn't. Instead, I stared at her, the woman I thought I knew, the woman I had loved for so long, and realized that everything was a lie. You really are AF * King Monster. I whispered, my voice broken, barely audible. All this time, you pretended to be miserable when the truth is you're just selfish. You used me, and now you're trying to pin it all on me like I'm the one who made you do this. Emily scoffed, rolling her eyes again, the smugness returning. Whatever helps you sleep at night, Jake. But we both know this marriage was dead long before tonight. The kitchen felt like it was closing in on me, the walls too tight, the air too thin. I couldn't take it anymore. I had nothing left to say. Nothing that would change what she'd done. Nothing that would bring back the life we built together. The woman standing in front of me wasn't the person I married. She wasn't even a stranger. She was worse. She was the one who tore everything apart with a smile on her face. I'm done. I finally said, my voice hollow. I'm leaving, and I'm never coming back. Emily didn't even blink. She just shrugged, picking up her wine glass again like we were talking about something as simple as a bad day at work. Do what you want. It's not like it matters anymore. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, my mind swirling with disbelief. How did we get here? But the answer didn't matter anymore. Nothing did. As I slammed the front door behind me, I didn't feel any relief. No closure, no resolution. Just the cold realization that the life I thought I had was gone, and I drove aimlessly for what felt like hours. The street lights blurring into streaks of light against the dark sky. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. Every inch of me tense, raw, burning with an anger that had no outlet. Emily's words were on repeat in my head. That sickening smile, the casual way she tore me apart like I was nothing. Like we were nothing. You were never going to be enough for me. I couldn't get that out of my head. The way she said it so easily, like it was the most obvious truth in the world. Something she had believed all along while I had been breaking my back, trying to build a life for us. All this time, she had been living a double life. Laughing behind my back with some guy from the gym. Using me for stability, while seeking her excitement elsewhere. The betrayal was worse than anything I'd ever imagined. But what tore me up even more was that she wasn't even sorry. She didn't care. She never cared. I pulled over in some empty parking lot. My chest heaving, breath coming in short, shallow bursts as the reality of it all sank in. The woman I had loved, trusted, and built a life with had been lying to me for God knows how long. Not only that, she had the audacity to kiss my brother in front of me, laugh in my face, and then blame me for everything falling apart. I slammed my fists against the steering wheel, the horn blaring into the night as I let out a roar that was more animal than human. A sound filled with rage, pain, and utter helplessness. I felt like I was drowning in it, suffocating under the weight of what my life had become in just a few hours. Then my phone buzzed. For a moment, I considered ignoring it, but something made me glance at the screen. It was a text from Nick. Jake, man, we need to talk. I get that you're pissed, but you're overreacting. Let's just meet up. Clear the air. This whole thing isn't what you think it is. I stared at the screen, my fingers twitching as I considered throwing the phone out the window. Clear the air? What was there to clear? He'd stood there smirking while Emily kissed him. Let her get away with it, and now he wanted to play it off like I was the one blowing things out of proportion? Another message popped up. This time it was from Emily. You're really just gonna walk away after everything? Grow up, Jake. That was it. I couldn't sit there anymore. I couldn't take the constant gaslighting, the smugness, the lies. They wanted to pretend like I was being dramatic, like my entire world hadn't just collapsed under their betrayal. Fine. Let's see how they handled what was coming next. I started the car again, my mind racing with a plan I didn't even know I had until that moment. There was no turning back now. I wasn't going to sit there and let them rewrite the narrative, make me the bad guy in their twisted story. I drove straight to Nick's apartment. My hands were steady now, the boiling anger sharpening into something colder, more focused. I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do when I got there, but I knew one thing. I wasn't leaving without making sure he understood the gravity of what he'd done. By the time I reached his place, it was well past midnight. The parking lot was deserted, the building looming above me in eerie silence. I stepped out of the car, every step toward his door feeling heavier, more final. I banged on the door harder than I intended, the sound echoing down the hallway. It took a few minutes, but finally, Nick opened the door, looking half asleep and annoyed. Jake, he muttered, rubbing his eyes, still trying to act like this was all just some minor inconvenience. What the hell are you doing here? It's late. I shoved past him, storming into his apartment without waiting for an invitation. We're going to settle this right now, I said, my voice cold and steady. I wasn't yelling anymore. There was no need. The fury was quiet now, deadly. Nick sighed, closing the door behind him and running a hand through his hair. Look, I get it. You're pissed, but you need to calm down. You're making this into something way bigger than it needs to be. Bigger, I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. You let my wife kiss you in front of me. You didn't stop her. You didn't push her away. You played along with it like it was some kind of sick joke. And now you're telling me I'm making it bigger than it needs to be. Nick threw up his hands, frustration flashing across his face. Jesus, Jake, it was a mistake, all right? I didn't mean for it to happen, and I sure as hell didn't plan on hurting you. But it's not like we were screwing behind your back or something. It was just a stupid moment. I stepped closer, my eyes burning into his. And what about Emily? What about the fact that she's been screwing around with some guy from the gym for months? You knew about that, didn't you? Nick's eyes flickered. A brief moment of hesitation, and that was all I needed. Of course you knew. I growled, my voice dropping even lower. You've always known. You've always been in on it. Just waiting for your moment. Jake, you're being paranoid. He snapped, taking a step back. You think I've been sitting around plotting against you? Get a grip, man. I didn't even know about the gym guy. But you didn't care, did you? I hissed, my fist clenching. You didn't care how it hurt me, how it destroyed everything I thought I had, because to you none of this is real. It's just a game. Nick stared at me for a long moment, and finally something in him broke. Fine. You want the truth? He said, his voice tight, his eyes blazing. Maybe I didn't stop her, because deep down I thought you deserved it. You've always had the perfect life, Jake. The job, the house, the wife, and I've been the screw-up, right? The one who never gets it right. Maybe I wanted to see what it felt like to have something that was yours. Couldn't breathe. His words dripping with jealousy, and spite crashed over me like a tidal wave. You wanted to take what was mine? I whispered, my voice shaking with disbelief. You wanted to ruin everything just because you're bitter about your own FCK-UPS? Nick didn't answer. He just stood there, chest heaving, his face twisted with resentment. And in that moment, I realized something. This wasn't just about Emily. Nick had always been the poison in my life, always lurking in the shadows, waiting for his moment to take something that wasn't his. I had spent my whole life protecting him, defending him, forgiving him, and all he ever wanted was to watch me fall. I took a deep breath, my fists unclenching as a cold clarity washed over me. You're not my brother anymore, I said quietly, my voice steady. You're just a pathetic, jealous coward who will never have anything of his own because all you can do is destroy what other people build. Nick's face twisted in rage, but before he could say anything, I turned and walked out the door, slamming it behind me. The moment I stepped outside, the cold night air hit me, and for the first time in hours, I felt something close to peace. I had nothing left. No brother, no wife, no life I recognized. But I also had nothing holding me down anymore. The cold night air bit at my skin as I walked away from Nick's apartment, but I barely felt it. The weight that had been crushing me for hours was gone, replaced by an eerie calm. I cut ties with him finally. No more forgiving, no more excuses. My entire life had burned to the ground in the span of a single night, but somehow in the wreckage, there was a strange sense of relief. I had no idea where I was going next, but I knew I couldn't go home. Not to that house. Not with her still there. Not after everything she'd said. After every lie that had poured from her lips. The house wasn't a home anymore. It was a graveyard for the life I thought I had. I drove for hours, my mind blank for the first time in what felt like forever. No more rage. No more spiraling thoughts. Just empty streets and the sound of tires on the pavement. I didn't even realize where I was heading until I pulled up to the one place that still made sense. My parents' old cabin by the lake. It was run down, barely touched in years, but I had the key on my keychain. The same one I'd had since I was 16. I've been coming here with Nick every summer as kids. Fishing and telling ghost stories, pretending like nothing bad could ever touch us. Funny how those memories now felt like a lifetime ago, belonging to someone else entirely. I stepped out of the car, the moonlight reflecting off the still water. The place hadn't changed, and that was a comfort. It was frozen in time, untouched by the mess that my life had become. I pushed open the creaky door, and the familiar smell of old wood and dust hit me, bringing back flashes of childhood. Simpler times. Times when I still believed in family, in love, in all the things that seemed like fairy tales now. I dropped onto the worn-out couch, the silence of the cabin wrapping around me like a blanket. For the first time that night, I allowed myself to feel the exhaustion, the weight of the betrayal, the anger and grief over everything I had lost, everything I had been fooled into believing was real. I thought about Emily, her face, her words, the way she had twisted everything and made me out to be the problem. She had sat there in our kitchen laughing as my world fell apart. The audacity, the cruelty, and yet in her mind, she was the victim. Trapped in a life she didn't want, bored by the security and stability I thought we both valued. I'd spent years building a life around her, giving her everything I had, and in return, she betrayed me with a shrug. But now she was gone. Not physically, not yet, but emotionally, mentally. She had been gone long before I had even realized it. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my phone. There were missed calls, Emily twice. A couple of texts from her too, but I couldn't bring myself to read them. I already knew what they'd say. More gaslighting. More pretending this was all just a minor inconvenience. A bump in the road that we could smooth over if I just got over it. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. Instead, I texted her 4 simple words, "I'll send the papers." It was over. There was no going back now. I wasn't interested in her excuses or explanations anymore. I had wasted enough of my life trying to fix something that was never mine to fix. If she wanted excitement, if she wanted chaos and thrills, she could have it, but not with me. I stared at the message for a moment, my thumb hovering over the send button, wondering if this was really how it all ended. Then with a deep breath, I pressed send. There was no response, just the quiet, cold night and the sound of my breath in the empty cabin. And in that stillness, I started to feel something I hadn't expected. Freedom. For the first time in years, I wasn't bound by the weight of someone else's needs, someone else's lies. I wasn't living for anyone else but myself. The road ahead was uncertain. Divorce wasn't going to be easy. Emily would make it hell, and Nick would probably pop back into my life at some point trying to spin his side of the story. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was that I had finally taken control. I wasn't their puppet anymore. I spent the rest of the night on that old couch, staring at the ceiling, my mind drifting between memories of the past and the unknown future. It hurt. God, did it hurt? But there was something else in the pain, something that felt like hope. Maybe not now, but someday. I would rebuild. Not the life I had with Emily, but something better, something that was truly mine. And as the first light of dawn broke over the lake, I felt it. The faintest flicker of peace, like the first breath after being underwater for too long. Emily and Nick had stolen a lot from me, but they hadn't taken everything. I still had myself, and I would be damned if I let them take that too. For now, that was enough. The sun rose slowly over the lake, casting a golden glow across the water, but I didn't move from the couch. I hadn't slept at all, but somehow, I felt more awake than I had in months. It was like everything had snapped into place overnight. Like the mess of my life was finally settling into something I could understand. The ache was still there, but so was something else, something stronger. I knew I wasn't going back. Not to Emily. Not to the life I thought I had. That chapter was over, burned to ashes. But what came next? That was a real question. I sat up, rubbing my face, feeling the stubble on my jaw, the stiffness in my muscles from the night spent on that old couch. The phone buzzed again. Another text from Emily, probably trying to bait me back into some twisted argument, but I ignored it. I wasn't going to play her game anymore. I was done being dragged into her chaos. Instead, I stood up and walked out onto the porch, breathing in the crisp morning air. The lake was calm, peaceful, the complete opposite of the storm that had torn through my life. The stillness of the water, the quiet of the woods surrounding me. It felt like a world far removed from the one I had left behind. Here, none of their lies could reach me. Here, I could start over. I pulled out my phone again, but this time, I wasn't looking at Emily's messages. I opened the number for a divorce lawyer I had saved months ago. During one of the countless times I had suspected something was off. I hadn't wanted to believe it then. Hadn't wanted to admit that my marriage was rotting from the inside. But now, there was no denial left. Just a cold, hard reality that I needed to cut her out of my life completely and for good. The call was short. I didn't have the energy to dive into details, just gave the basics. Marriage falling apart, infidelity, need the papers filed as soon as possible. The lawyer said she'd send over the documents later that day. And when the call ended, I felt a strange sense of finality. Like the ground beneath me had finally steadied. I was taking the first steps toward reclaiming my life. But there was one last thing to deal with Nick. I hadn't heard from him since last night, since I'd walked out of his apartment after that punch. A part of me expected him to show up here, maybe try to make peace, try to worm his way back into my good graces like he always had.